It's really a pleasure to welcome you all tonight to tonight's Artists and Artist Lecture. It's the first of our spring season, and it's a really beloved series for those that don't know. It's been around since 2001. We've hosted many artists who've been speaking on various artists in our collection, program, or performance series. And we also launched a new publication series this year around the series that the first one has taken the artist Darboven as its artist of focus. And that book, if you haven't yet seen it, is actually on display just where you checked in. I do recommend you take a look. I also want to thank, just quickly, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, as well as Brooklyn Brewery for the beverages, and to our staff, Mary Catherine, Francesca, and Max, for their assistance tonight. This program wouldn't be possible without them. And finally, I want to extend my gratitude to Nick Mauss and Ken Okiishi. A few years ago, I worked with both Nick and Ken on an artist web project that Dia commissioned called Poetry is Not with Singing. And it was during this time that they shared with me their adoration for Hanne Darboven. And I always felt in the back of my mind, the minute I knew we were going to be showing cultural history again, I would reach out, and I did so. And so tonight, here we are, gathered for a lecture that's been many years in the making, and I am so thankful and honored that they took me up on the offer. I also highly encourage you to engage with their Artist Web project. For me, it's something that I continuously return to and am impressed by their collaborative approach to how it once privileged the self-experience, but also allow for what I would maybe say is a collective response. And without further ado, I want to thank you again for coming and welcome, and join me in welcoming tonight's lecture with Nick Mauss and Ken Okiishi.
Is it possible, this nothing thinks, that one has not yet seen, recognized, and said anything real and important? Is it possible that one has had thousands of years of time to look, reflect, and write down, and that one has let the millennia pass away like a school recess in which one eats one sandwich and an apple? Yes, it is possible. Is it possible that in spite of inventions and progress, in spite of culture, religion, and worldly wisdom, that one has remained on the surface of life? Is it possible that one has even covered this surface, which would at least have been something, with an incredibly dull slipcover so that it looks like living room furniture during the summer vacation? Yes, it is possible. Is it possible that the whole history of the world has been misunderstood? Is it possible that the past is false because one has always spoken of its masses as if one was telling about a coming together of many people, instead of telling about the one person they were standing around because he was alien and died? Yes, it is possible. Is it possible that one believed one has to make up for everything that happened before one was born? Is it possible one would have to remind every single person that he arose from all earlier people so that he would know it, and not let himself be talked out of it by the others who see it differently? Yes, it is possible. Is it possible that all these people know very precisely a past that never was? Is it possible that everything real is nothing to them? That their life takes its course, connected to nothing, like a clock in an empty room? Yes, it is possible. That's from the notebooks of Malte Lauritz Brigge, Rainer Maria Rilke's only novel, published in 1910. Hanne Darboven's work is its own user's manual. The artist was determined that the work should be open to anyone. In its exhaustive allness, Darboven's work offers so many levels of reading, so many simultaneous structures, that it can be approached again and again, its richness, density, and then again its flatness and remove, confounding and erupting at different points of the encounter with the work. One tries to make sense of it. One finds a foothold. Darboven zooms out and one begins again, constructing the work along with the artist, though so much is out of reach, thinking and locating oneself within the work, alongside historical figures, subjects, minds, and brackets of time. Darboven said, "I see myself as a writer, which I am, regardless of what other visual materials I may use. I am a writer first and a visual artist second. What kind of literature is this? It is verse. There are many German words, all with different historical weights, related to the activity of writing. Schreiben, Aufschreiben, Abschreiben, Schriftsteller, Autor, Kopist. Then, of course, there is Friedrich Kittler's designation of Aufschreibesysteme, literally translated, writing down systems. The writing produced by Rilke's protagonist, Malte Lauritz-Brigge, is called Aufzeichnung, which describes notation, the keeping of records, witnessing, or even accounting. I think the Aufzeichnungen of the character invented by Rilke, whose mind Darboven also thought alongside, is closest to her kind of writing. Everything in the world exists in order to end up in a book, Stefan Mallarmé suggests. But Darboven says, in a quote transcribed from I don't know where onto a postcard to her American gallerist Leo Castelli, a book is a mirror. If an ass peers into it, you can't expect an apostle to look out. The subject of Darboven's versification is the 20th century seen from a culturally German point of view, with all the baggage, blindness, and particularity that entails. Perhaps there is a relationship between Darboven's overarching project and Mallarmé's greatest unrealized ambition, a book called simply The Book. Intended to reveal all existing relations between everything, Mallarmé's multi-volume architectonic book allowed for interchangeability of his precisely laid out volumes and a flexible navigation of the text, including vertical and horizontal reading. But much as one can emphasize the importance of the form of the book in Darboven's work, I would argue that Kulturgeschichte 1880 bis 1983, Cultural History 1880 to 1983 in particular, has already transitioned away from this form. Darboven's writing and its relationship to image undergoes a change over time, from the initial productions of calendars and manuscripts, literally written or copied by hand, to the production of annotated albums, with the addition, through collage, of reproduced images, found and self-generated printed matter, postcards, calendar pages, disbound books, and antiquarian objects. Writing is displaced from the frames of the pages on walls it once filled, to taking place under, around, and between pictures or placeholders on the virtual page. The wordless writing of Hanne Darboven is her signature. Through it, she practices her recurring dictum, und keine Worte mehr, and no more words. But of course, there is plenty to read in Darboven, and it's surprising to notice where the articulated language is nested or put to use, and it is often pointed. When Darboven writes out a word, the act of marrying an image to a proper name becomes almost over-invested with significance. The mixture of legible and surrogate writing in Darboven's constant production is of interest to me. The shifting of registers, of accessibility, depth, both for the author and for the viewer. I am writing to you, I am writing to myself, I am writing to the inner voice, and you may observe the traces. Nevertheless, always the need to write herself, her own thoughts, indexes, dates, additions, annotations, redactions, copying out collections of quotes or encyclopedia entries, or even writing out longer canonical texts. The transfer of existing texts into her own handwriting. As Darboven stated, quote, "I wrote by hand in order to be mediated myself by the mediated experience." According to Friedrich Kittler, historians differentiate between two cultures of writing. One is that of the writer, where the ability to write is a privilege, and therefore a function of power. And the other is that of the educated, where writing and reading are interconnected, and therefore become universalizable. The European Middle Ages saw the extreme case of writers who, as mere copyists or calligraphers, were not meant to be able to read that which they multiplied by hand, the discourse of the Lord. But copying and writing were not necessarily separate. One of Darboven's earliest works is a series of 4 small colored drawings. The first in the series depicts, as you can see, the words Hanne and Darboven in black. The word Darboven is larger because it is the family name and the brand name of the family coffee company, known throughout Germany and the source of their great fortune. It is written here on the scale of the brand the child perceived everywhere as she moved around her world. This, her name, emblazoned everywhere, on tins, on advertising posters, stationery, promotional calendars, and so on. The remaining 3 drawings show earnest renditions of artists' utensils, including a book bearing the words Schriftheft, script or handwriting notebook. Around the same time, the child artist again returns to her name, objectifying and estranging it even further from the self to which it has been assigned, by echoing and breaking the 2 names to fill the limits of a piece of paper. Much later in life, Darboven continues to play with her name, as here, where it is paired with its mirror image and becomes Enna Hanne at the bottom. In December of 1974, Darboven writes in German and in English what can only be understood as a wish coming up against its limits. Sich mit Schreiben verständigen können. Ich kann mich nicht mitteilen. Ich kann mich nicht verständlich machen. To make oneself understood through writing, I can't convey myself. I can't make myself understood. Darboven's private letters illuminate her work insofar as they're made in the same way as her work. The stream of thinking and writing is one and the same. The private and the presentational mode are contiguous. But what becomes apparent in the letters, and what I think takes more time to arrive at in the monumentality of Darboven's presentation, is the affection, tenderness, desire for closeness, feelings of loneliness, and the recurring struggle with the rush of feelings that are unutterable, beyond words, incommunicable, inexpressible, overwhelming, repellent, frightening, or simply nameless. In 1966, following her studies at the Hochschule für Bildende Künste in Hamburg, Darboven moved to New York for 2 years where, as she declared in a filmed interview, she worked, found myself, after the academy to comprehend, can you freely practice a vocation, or are you a child of this world, even of the art world? And that is something I didn't want to be, and also something I did not become. Darboven writes 2 letters daily to her family at Am Burgberg, the family home to which she will return once she has found what she declared as her Lebensaufgabe, literally lifetime assignment or duty, and where she will spend the rest of her life in fulfillment of that life duty. Hanne's letters brim with submerged feeling and unadorned poetic self-reflection. She uses language in its components, playing with its lightness, reversibility, its humiliating arbitrariness. The practice of letter writing maintains a constant necessary dialogue for Hanne. The intimate dialogue with the family, but also the connection to an epistolary culture from which Darboven's worldview emerges. Hanne's letters to her mother are particularly poignant, copious, and repetitive. In this letter from New York, dated 1969, she writes, I'm going to read it in German first because you have to hear it. Meine liebe Mutter, dir nur gute Nacht, habe den Tag mit New York verbracht. Wie dir sagen, wie überhaupt vermitteln, kenne so genau eine Situation, als wäre es immer so fortgegangen, als hätte man immer so fortverweilt, gelebt, eigenartig, erlebt so, gelebt so, und unbewusst, darum wissend, unwissen und immer wieder so. Man weiß, man ist, man weiß, man war, man weiß, man ist. Auch so meine Impressionen, dass mein New York gewesen, dass mein New York sein, das. Es ist erstaunlich, erstaunlich gleich schön, erstaunlich gleich schrecklich, erstaunlich gleich nah, erstaunlich gleich fern. Es ist erstaunlich, wie alles so sehr weitergeht, gehen könnte, brauche ich, kann ich nicht deutlich sagen. Oh, oder auch nicht, weiß es nicht. Ekel und Wonne, kannte beides leidenschaftlich, meistens leidvoll. Anders heute, wie alles so bleiben hätte können. Siehe, lese Gesagtes von zum Beispiel New York und doch umfassend, eingeschlossen unser Einst, ist es nicht geblieben. Dass das gut ist, fühle ich. Weiteres ist soweit gesagt, obwohl kaum sagbar. Mache alles, morgen Eröffnung im Whitney Museum Party, bis später, dir die so liebe Hanne. My dear mother, to you only good night, have spent the day in with New York. How to tell you, how to transmit. Know so exactly a situation as if it had always gone this way, as if one had always paused, away, lived, strange, experienced like this, lived so and conscious, therefore knowing, not knowing, and always again like this. One knows what one is, one knows what one was, one knows what one is. Also, thus my impressions, this has been my New York, this will be my New York. This. It is astonishing. Astonishing equals beautiful. Astonishing equals horrible. Astonishing equals close. Astonishing equals far. It is astonishing the way everything keeps continuing so much, could continue to go on. I can not clearly say. Oh, or also not, don't know. Disgust and bliss. Knew both passionately, mostly disconsolate, different today. How everything could have stayed just like this, it has not stayed. That is good, I feel. Anything more is said too much, though barely sayable. I do everything. Tomorrow opening party at the Whitney Museum. Bis später, your beloved Hanne. Later, when Hanne has returned home, she writes in-house letters to her mother, many of them specifying the different times at which she wishes to be woken up so that she can resume her life work. I first mistook this one as another letter from New York. It seems to be written from a great distance. And this one's short. Allerliebste Mutter, Dank dir, Dank für den großen Tag. So schön besinnlich, so inhaltsreich. Ach, gar nicht sagbar, empfindbar, spürbar, kostbar. Du, so eine große Begleiterin, Gefährtin, Dank für dich, Dank für die Kostbarkeiten von dir. Verzeih meine Wiederholung, still, besinnlich, weiter möchte ich tun, weiter suchen, finden, wieder, immer, deine Hanne, 68. Dearest Mother, thank you, thank for the enormous day, so beautiful, contemplative, so rich in meaning, oh, impossible to say, perceive, feel, precious. You, such a great fellow traveler, companion. Thank for you, thank for the treasures from you. Forgive my repetition. Still reflective, further I want to do, make, further search, find. Again, always, your Hanne, 68. Hanne's letters are written in verse. The exclamation "oh" appears as often as in German Romantic literature to express longing, excitement, surprise, but mostly to prolong dwelling on Hanne's affection for her mother. Meine Liebe, oh, liebste Mutter. This is another in-house letter from Hanne to Mutter. As part of her daily stream of writing, diary writing, work writing, calendaring, letter writing, bookkeeping, letters are a meditation on someone far away, much as Darboven's work is a harnessing of someone distant in time who is very much on her mind. An exuberant and profuse postal exchange with Carl Andre dates from Hanne's time in New York. The artists sent each other experiments in concrete poetry as love letter that often spills over into the psychedelic. Andre's head-over-heels misunderstanding of the urgency of Darboven's work is evidenced in this postcard, with its cheap imitation of her writing, it verges on cruelty. In-house letters from Hanne to her mother turn into the wordless fill we have come to associate with Darboven, the handwriting exercise repeated ad infinitum because it is so calming, so pleasurable to do it well, and it says everything. The letter has been reduced to the minimum of its form. The body is a space to fill between the hailing of the recipient and the sender's salutation. I don't know if anyone has ever done a handwriting analysis of the development of the wordless writing, but I believe that it emerges between the writing of the shapes that become the words Hanne and Mutter. In the mental space of writing a letter, the space of andenken, thinking of. The wordless writing of Hanne Darboven is her signature. What can the wordless in-house letters to her mother possibly mean but I'm thinking of you, I have so much to tell you, even here you are so far away, or I am far from you because I must be with and in my work. Please wake me up. When compared to the work of Anna Oppermann, her lesser-known but also brilliant classmate at the Hochschule für Bildende Künste in Hamburg, Darboven's art looks like the work of a dutiful bureaucrat. But when Darboven introduced objects into her text installations in 1978, she invited confrontational rupture into what could otherwise be a somewhat lulling, removed, unknowing engagement with her work. Living, and according to her own mythology, constantly writing on a multitude of writing stations situated within a growing collection of antiquarian objects of every type, scale, and value, crammed into the complex of buildings at Am Burgberg she shared with her mother, Darboven matured into an extraordinarily orderly hoarder. There's another logic going on in Darboven's accumulation of things and her eventual incorporation of certain of these relics into her installations. A few facts. None of the objects in Kulturgeschichte seem to come from the immediate present of the work states of production, nor from its immediate past. A certain cringe of obsolescence is required. There are apparently no specific positions for these objects within the work. This means they're not fixed to specific sections of framed works and can be arranged differently depending on other given spatial conditions. It seems to be that a kind of even distribution may be called for, so long as the experience of reading Kulturgeschichte is regularly punctured by encounters with these various figures. And in Kulturgeschichte, they are almost all figures, unless they are furniture or religious objects that refer directly to a child or adult body intended for them. The most recent object I could identify is the pair of mannequins in matching tracksuits, what the Germans call Partnerlook, which I would date by their hairstyles and attire to the mid-1970s. Then there's the catalog for the exhibition Kunst der 60er Jahre, Art of the 60s, at the Wallraf-Richartz-Museum in 1969. The book is famous for its thick, transparent plastic cover and interleaving of artist portraits silk-screened on mylar sheets over tipped-in color reproductions of their artworks. In order to use this object, Darboven had to resort to a toolkit to undo the hardware that binds the book, strip it of its heavy plastic cover, and then proceed to separate the portrait pages from the portfolio pages in order to completely undermine the innovative layout of the book and render it as information.
Mathe mit Hanne, math lesson with Hanne. One of the more terrifying aspects of Hanne Darboven's work is her invention, as she called it, her, quote, mathematical prose. And as Bridget Doherty has brilliantly argued, this mathematically related writing is what Darboven has referred to as, quote, real writing. I will attempt to add to the existing readings of Darboven's math, but please bear with me, this is Darboven, so it might get a little unhinged. It starts off simply enough, if you can find the right key. The German art theorist Dr. Ingrid Berbacher-Krupke offers, I think, the clearest beginning. In her book on Darboven from 1995, Constructed Literary Musical, she uncovers the mathematical prose, and I am accepting from this here. In an interview from 1981, Darboven describes the core like this. My work is not unintelligible data crunching as we know in this computer age. It begins with 1 plus 1 results in 1, 2. 2 results in 1, 2. This dead simple mathematical system is something we rely on. So Hanne begins with counting numbers, with natural numbers, the numbers you use to count things in the world, on your fingers. One thing and one thing are two. Two things are, count them, 1, 2 things. This basis appears over and over in multiple different works in multiple configurations, and eventually even becomes like a personal emblem used like a postage stamp for her self-made postcards. In the moments of the work that function like keys to reading the work in general, it basically signals the mathematical statement, albeit in a highly idiosyncratic way, in the realm of natural numbers. Rewind. A 1967 description of her work describes how the mathematical prose emerges like this. Many variations exist in my work. There is a consistent flexibility and changeability evidencing the relentless flux of events. At this moment, I know what I did and what I am doing. What will happen further, I shall see. And in 1969, my notations are based on the daily dates of this year, 1969. 69 equals 17K results in 58K equals number 1 results in number 1, and actually she uses funny things. Number 1 through number 42, all of this over K equals construction. The numerical dates of the days of the year generate a total of 42 sums of digits. These sums become progressively larger from 17 through 58, increase in frequency from 1 to 12, and then go back to 1. Specimen calculations. 1,169, and this means January 1st, 1969, equals 1 plus 1 plus 6 plus 9 equals 17, results in number 1 equals 17K. The second one is the 2nd of January 69 and goes through the same operation. The digits 6 and 9 of the year are added separately. All other double-digit numbers are treated as single numbers. All notes are written in figures. Every number is repeated a number of times, equivalent to its numerical value, which you can see at the bottom. The calendar forms the basic system. Its numerical series are reduced to the sum of digits. The number of months determines the incidence of each construction. There are a maximum of 12 different permutations which combine to give one sum of digits. The system guarantees that all of the dates of the days in the year 69 and other years can be retrieved, even when not expressly recorded. The letter K can stand either for construction, construction, or for kasten, box, and thus alludes to the end product of the artist's work. The constructions form the basis of a system that makes the numerical sequence quantifiable in visual terms. The passing of 1 year, for example, can be seen in a number of different guises, as additive growth in the box presentation, kasten, or as a single great curve in numerical notation. As you can see, this is where the math gets weird. The primary cut that Darboven makes in the logical systems that make mathematical systems consistent and relatable to each other, the primary cut is ignoring the place of the tens digit and the ones digit. She treats every number, regardless of the number of digits, as if it can be sliced into a series of 1 and 1 digits, but also as if it can be sliced only sometimes, yet sometimes remain intact as a multiple-digit normal acting number. This childlike, willfully arbitrary and full of fantasy move of counting everything maybe as one thing after the other regardless of its proper place in basic mathematical logic, or as if nothing is larger than 9, or the world is made only of one thing after the other as a series of 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 into infinity, is the primary rupture that makes Darboven feel both so wonky and pleasurable at the same time. This is the non-logic of childhood erotics, relentlessly systematized as a grand system realized as an ever-expanding, potentially infinite space. The indexing system of the Ks that can refer to both the concept construction and to a carton, a box, that keeps the mathematical prose intact, also relies on an ancient, in the way that we see childhood as always ancient as well, way of signifying the relationship between a thing and a sound. The ka of construction and carton are the only things that link these disparate words and things and sounds. And by returning to this newly arbitrary relationship, by making the relationship between signifier and signified arbitrary again, by upending sound and logic, Darboven reroutes our brain in pleasurable loops of noise and shattering, or laughs, or shaking the head in wonderful disbelief. This huge space full of these outrageously, relentlessly rerouted and entirely closed calculations that are also incapable to anything other than the production of an infinite number of Darboven's own closed system calculations. This part of Darboven's work, mostly coming out of her early work and then self-plagiarized and copied by hand again in later works, including Kulturgeschichte, is often the most initially mystifying and critically remystified aspect of her work. With the right key, it becomes relatively easy to read what is going on, even if the illegal mathematical moves always make it always already impossible to comprehend the math-like operations in one logical system. Another form of directly mathematical prose, the famous flows of wavy lines that appear in her work, have often been seen as more self-evidently readable. These direct, even simple, and frequently read as emptied or voided gestures, or as something that can be made to look like something else, even menthol cigarette smoke. These flows, as well as her writing with mass media images, constitutes what I would like to argue are, in fact, her more complex form of math. These lines are obviously related to learning to write cursive. They are obviously empty of direct sound-to-thing signification. But like Darboven's earlier math-related systems, do they have a precise idiosyncratic origin? What is the key to reading these flows? As Nick already elaborated on, the formative experience for Darboven as a 25-year-old artist was moving to New York after art school. As is the often repeated part of this part of Darboven's personal history, she interfaced with the people who would become key figures in conceptual art, her future art dealer, and this is where she developed what would drive the work for the rest of her life, her first explicitly mathematical prose. Another aspect of this time, another daily practice, was writing 2 long letters to her family back in Germany. Over 4 years, she wrote over 650 pages of letters. This daily practice of writing, this time for writing, this Schreibzeit, as she would call it, is a clear precursor to her mature artistic work. But I think the connection is more than conceptual or foundational. In one of the explicitly mathematical sections of Kulturgeschichte, Darboven explicitly names what act she is performing in this basic flow of supposedly non-signifying writing. As you can see clearly here, she is counting. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 44. Each upstroke is a count of 1 unit. In other less carefully keyed sections of Kulturgeschichte, the counting aspect of this flow of line becomes clearer with this key. Here you can see that she's counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then there's a mark, and then she crosses out for 10. And then it continues for 10 and 10, and the last one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, crossing out for 7. The other aspect of the Welttheater are these little cute figurines. What these mathematical figures have to do with cute animal and figurine toys in a Welttheater, a world theater of 79, which keeps opening and closing the curtain. If you can see on this side, the curtain is closed. It says closed curtain in German, and then the curtain opens. It says curtain open on the side, and it keeps going like that through the entire section, which keeps opening and closing the curtain in each panel. and why the number figure cards each appear twice in a row on stage. In this opening and closing curtain stage will have to be developed at a later stage. But the point here is that these waves of flows of lines are in fact waves of traces of counting, that the crossing out of the text is another step in the counting, and that Darboven seems to be counting and counting, that counting is a primary activity of the work. At a later stage in her work, sometimes the counting and the number of crests to the stroke do not line up. We see her losing count, as she does so frequently in the work she made in homage to her art dealer in New York, Leo Castelli, for the 30th anniversary of the gallery in 1987, whom she had known since the late 1960s and had her first offer to show with in 1971. If you can see here on this side, the first one does add up to 10, but the next one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, should add up to 4, but is in fact 6, and on and on and on like that. That the homage to her New York art dealer had so many accounting errors will be funny to any artist who has had an art dealer. But back to the letters from New York. Meine liebe Mutti, my dearest mommy. Let's look at the U of Mutti in comparison to the later supposedly non-signifying script. As Nick has already shown, this forms the basis of this form in her work, the U of Mutti and the double N of Hanne, but let's look a bit closer. When the count is 2, the letter is U. This is obvious enough. And while this might seem at first either too obvious or a stretch in terms of significance, let's look one more place. Let's look at the way she writes Hanne one more time. Notice the way Hanne writes the double N's, the 2 N's in a row in her name. Rather than arching over, as is the taught way to write an N in cursive, Hanne moves through, counting out 1, 2, 3, 4 ups, and then a loop for an E. It is perhaps here where you can see most clearly the relationship of natural numbers to cursive writing, the clearest relationship of natural numbers to schreiben and aufschreiben, writing things down, the clearest relationship between counting, naming, and the artist herself. But let's go back to the initial pocket calendars of 1966, where the relationship of calendar to math finds its temporal origin. Let's look at her later, more fully excised and developed flows of waves of script in comparison to these notebooks. In this image, we see the word writer in English, followed by a flow of script of 1, 2, 3, 4 upswings in the wave, like writing the 2 N's in the signature Hanne, followed by what seems to be a letter T, followed by an E, and this is all crossed out. Let's look at the later formation that is imprinted all over Kulturgeschichte and much of her mature period of work. What many people interpret as the word heute, which means today, crossed out. Look at the end of it. And now look back at the notebook of 1966. It can be read as writer, followed by 2 N's, as in 1, 2, 3, 4 strokes to write her name. Insert the T of heute, and then the loop of E, both the words heute and Hanne. Now, cross it out for one final count to cross the T and count the day as finished. Look at this other panel from Kulturgeschichte, where Darboven writes heute in English as well, places it within the staves used to write music. During Schreibzeit, during the part of the day set aside for writing, the Happy News telegram also has heute and today in music staves. Gedankenstrich, a slash in German, has reached its final count and is crossed off. The desk has reached its final count and is crossed off. 15 counts and crests of flow writing are crossed off. The Helen Britt Miami Beach gift jewelry and decorative accessories show, the booth layout is pasted here, from the Miami Beach Convention Hall. A marketplace for selling sparkling luxury commodities appears. What is this doing here? Urzeit, or primeval time, also makes an appearance on the form of her self-made postcards, which also make up an entire large section of Kulturgeschichte, reappearing in various other sections as well. The postcard contains images from a description of her hometown in terms of ancient geological formation. At the bottom of this postcard it is printed, and the postcard comes in this and a few other forms in different texts. Printed here, I'm translating from German. Patriotism, nationalism, cosmopolitanism, decadence. The stamp she made with her emblem, 2 equals 1, 2, 1 plus 1 equals 1, 2 is there. The page is ended with the finished count of 10. In order to start to illuminate the complexity of Hanne Darboven's unworkings of mathematical logic, I'm going to make a short detour through the two main late 20th century thinkers of ontology and mathematics in Europe. The first and most obvious in relation to Darboven is Friedrich Hitler. But I'm going to start with Alain Badiou first in order to work backwards from our own current moment of surreal political reality. Anyone familiar with Badiou's math lessons knows that he brings us from whole natural numbers, as he calls them, to surreal numbers, a concept he cites from a book, Introduction to Surreal Numbers, from 1986. I will spare you the tedium of the mathematical proofs, as fun and or annoyingly magical as they can be, to get to the core relationship I hope to bring out in relation to Darboven. Badiou's main takeaway from surreal numbers is that they are a set of everything divided by 0, meaning an impossibility that can also be mathematically proven to exist. He places this mathematical concept within a political theology that follows in a line of Marxist revolutionary thinking. He pastes this mathematical concept of surreal numbers onto a description of the surreal zone where political revolution can happen. A connection to the Althusserian epistemological break, the surreal reality of liminal political zones that both incite and happen somehow, and I find this heavily mystified. That mass revolution or upheaval or simply change is somehow related to making the real impossibility of dividing the complete set of everything in the world by 0 come to pass, to actualize the existence of the impossible possibility. I think our current plunge into surreal reality of global and national politics as they actually feel surreal now also makes this sort of mystification ring with an authoritarian alarm bell. But the point of discussing Badiou's take on surreal numbers in this talk is to point out how funky things get when Darboven in Kulturgeschichte arrives from her seemingly infinite ancient set of natural numbers, meaning counting numbers, counting while weaving, at a moment of not one, when the real 0 emerges rather than the 0 that can be counted as one of the existing digits in a year. An inventory of the contents of Kulturgeschichte includes many previously discrete works that are self-plagiarized by Darboven from her corpus of mathematical prose. Indeed, as you start to look at the entire work as a whole, these repetitions are striking in the way she both self-plagiarizes and plagiarizes the works of other people. I'm using the term plagiarism without specific value judgment here. It's a way of making a distinction from the terms appropriation of Levine prints and the repetition of Sturtevant and the self-referentiality of so many other 20th century practices. It's also the appropriate term in the realm of writing. Another way to understand this could be that her mathematical prose functions as programs or coding, and the repetition or reuse of code is a way of extending and elaborating upon work to develop larger and more complex programs. But that is not my main interest either. Two of the singular sections of Kulturgeschichte, section 6, which consists of the entire Ludwig collection catalog from the early 70s, and section 5, which consists of Franz Donat's Grosses Bindungslexikon, Dictionary of Weave Structures for Loom Weaving, second edition. As far as I can tell, both are entirely singular to this Darboven work and plagiarized in totality from other books. These sections are also notable in their relative absence of Darboven's standard forms of mathematical prose. For section 6, almost 3 walls, as the work is installed at DIA right now, consist of a meticulously disassembled catalog of the Peter Ludwig collection of pop and minimal art that would eventually become the Museum Ludwig in Cologne. This seminal and famously flashy book consists of a clear PVC binding and interstitial acetate sheets throughout the book showing sexy images of artists in relation to hand-tipped plates of works acquired by Peter Ludwig that form the foundation of one of Germany's most important museums and collections of post-war American and European art. In fact, you could say this collection epitomized the post-war cultural interface of economic miracle Germany and pop art and also minimalist America. Darboven at some point decided that she absolutely hated what this collection represented. She came to find it from the 1983 point of view of when Kulturgeschichte was made, and this is explicitly written on the top of the cover of the book as it appears in Kulturgeschichte as, you can see it in the image there, as Agitprop Werbung Propaganda, which means agitprop advertising propaganda. And under that it says Postmoderna on either side of the printing press icon, which is crossed out, finished, counted. It says Intim, which means intimate, on the left, and Im Team, part of the team, in the team, on the right. She felt particular animus towards Gerhard Richter, who was obviously included in the book, whom she called a sellout in relation to his Baader-Meinhof work, and also claimed had no understanding of the intellectual and historical content of the material he copied painted from photographs. The point of view on the moment of the emergence of the famous Ludwig catalog has been filtered through years of distance, but also perhaps years of feeling less and less present. As is stated on the first page of this section, Darboven worked through the material in Today of June of 1983. What is striking here to me and resonates in our own particular over-commodified, dematerialized, and over-financialized asset class version of art and art collecting in the present is the freaked-out anger related to exclusion as it intersects with critical positions. Darboven takes up an enormous amount of space in her history of culture to count the pages in a published history that she is not and would not want to be present. She carefully notes the names on the acetate sheets of sexy photos of artists, placing them like butterflies on a clean sheet and noting the name in pencil. She inserts each page of the catalog in alphabetical order by artist into her gridded frames, her field of reference and vision. She counts the panels. She marks the counting in standard numerals. She feels every page with the artist-narcissist feedback loop that is intrinsic to being excluded. I am not in this collection this many times. I am not in this catalog this many times. I am not in this show. What kind of mathematical prose is this? What kind of mathematical operation is this? In its pre-disassembled form, Darboven would count this as a huge one. A huge, huge one. This big, annoying one show and one catalog and one collection that she is not in. That is moved through disassembling each page and counting each page. The not me emerges as a not one, as a real zero. The act of picking up the individual page, gluing it down, working with her co-workers, as she liked to call them, in a line of excising and pasting, of thinking, no, this is not Hanne, Darboven, A, B, C, D. Looking at the Ds in the exhibition the other day, no, Darboven here, no Hanne, no mathematical prose here. Many of her friends are there. What was it like to write the name Andre next to the photo of Carl Andre, her friend and lover from New York? Oh, those days in New York, writing 2 letters a day to her family, working so hard, as she would tell them over and over, working so hard, proving to herself that she could live in the world, being there at the originary nexus of American conceptual art as it interfaced with her, being a German after the war, going into the world, this traumatized self, this traumatized nexus, being so visibly excluded from this history here on so many pages, being a zero, a not me, a situation where one does not want to be but hates not being in, or that the situation could or should be so different, so much less tacky, this marketplace, this phony bullshit. While not being included in a collection, in an art exhibition, in a marketplace, in a museum may seem like a pretty petty thing when compared to other problems, the philosophical question is fundamentally troubling. It is the difference between being counted and not being counted, which does not being a zero, which does not register any counting. It is the difference between existence and non-existence, of being there and being made to be not there. It is an active voiding, an active ignoring, and in Darboven's case, it is also an active choosing not to be part of this world, choosing to be not counted among this set of people and things. It is a traumatically, grandly, but privately stated no, that still feels the problems of absence relentlessly. As a side note, Darboven does not fully acknowledge in the work in a prolonged way the problematic of not being allowed to be counted and or being exterminated. She frames it as a will not to be counted out of a critical position, not as a primary political exclusion or elimination. Guest worker voting rights problematics contemporaneous to the creation of the work, and the then recent history related to the Shoah, the stripping of national citizenship protections of Jewish Germans and other demonized others during National Socialism, and eventual industrial killing, Darboven's subject position is entirely in line with the general bourgeois culture of her time, as the contemporaneous history that appears as magazine covers and other cultural artifacts in her work demonstrates. The obsession is with how the Nazi time ruptured and traumatized German culture and society as the post-war economic miracle and relatively late for Europe, globalization of Germany begins to happen, not with a historiography of the realities of racism and xenophobia in Germany. This is an overriding primary absence in Darboven's work that could be dealt with more in depth, but unfortunately that will have to wait for a different talk. Back to the Ludwig catalog. The not me, the not one, the one multiplied by zero, here is how I would define the emergence of a real zero, rather than a zero that takes its place in a series of counting numbers, which can all basically be thought of as 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, even if the digit is stated as zero, as versions of one. This real zero, this real absence, this real empty set, this real void, this is the moment when Darboven takes the entire catalog of the collection of the Museum Ludwig as representing what became of the contemporary history that she was an intrinsic part of, as it became something that she was excluded from. This is the moment when she asserts her presence by plagiarizing that situation and dividing it by zero. Immediately following the Ludwig catalog in the order of Darboven's Kulturgeschichte are art journalistic articles about the collectors whose collection became the core of this public museum, an ad for his chocolate company that connects buying his chocolate to being a member of high culture, a magazine cover from a tacky and popular magazine Art showing the Mona Lisa wearing a shirt that says Je heart Paris, an advertisement for a heating energy company linking history with heating and the 100 Deutschmark bill in an untranslatable joke, a self-ironic sort of kitsch version of Darboven's own art/air, followed by 4 strokes, the 2 N's in writing of her own name, followed by her artist signature, HD, and then a Spiegel magazine cover that appears multiple times in Kulturgeschichte showing Hitler with the word false. Hitler's diaries, related to a 1983 scandal in which someone had produced 62 fake diaries, supposedly by Hitler, which the Stern magazine had paid 6.3 million Deutschmarks for. Following this is a short passage of generic art calendars showing paintings by Caspar David Friedrich and lesser figures of standard German art history, followed by the entirety of Darboven's most scary-looking mathematical work from 1969, which includes in micro-small print perhaps the most elaborate essay ever written strictly about her mathematical operations by curator Johannes Claders. What interests me here in this rather messy conglomeration of critical irony, accusation, self-plagiarism, and half-thought spinning is its similarity to an effective and intellectually shredding situation we find ourselves in now. On the level of mathematical prose, I'm wondering what dividing by zero really looks like. What does surreal math, if it is not the road to the Nouvelle Paris Commune, really do? What does a mass of real zeros look like? What happens when a mass of zeros tries to divide everything else? This is from a film that Darboven made called Film 1 through 6 from 1968. I would like to add another kind of math to describe what Darboven does, as the math that comes after the failure and breakdown of surreal math. Darboven's mathematical prose works in traumatic math. This is not a math that leads to revolution, but a math that forces you deeply inwards, that fragilizes, or becomes fragilized by traumatic impossibilities that become unwanted but inescapable surreal realities. In section 5 of Kulturgeschichte, which consists of each page of Franz Donats Gross's Bindungslexikon, Dictionary of Weave Structures for Loom Weaving, 2nd edition, we arrive at an entirely different sense of what is going on in Darboven's mathematical prose. We also arrive at beginning to be able to feel the radically different temporalities, affects, speeds, and kinds of transmission going on simultaneously in the work. This is not a work that does one thing at a time. This is where Friedrich Kittler becomes illuminating. Kittler holds in natural numbers a special originary childhood erotics of the eeny, meeny, miny, mo, of complex mathematical and philosophical concepts that can be explained to children through natural numbers. The origins of numerals and signification, as in the relationship between reading, writing, singing, speaking, and hearing, in Kittler's perhaps not totally factually constituted version of the Greeks. We find natural numbers and numerals happening on the lyre or small harp in music, as numerals emerging from natural numbers when describing how to make a string sing in different pitches. Where to place one's finger, the finger that counts, in relation to pitch as something which generates the emergence of counting into numerals. Now for a great Darboven move, I'm going to plagiarize at length, to copy Kittler's writing into my mind, out of my voice, and onto you. But I'll have a drink of water first. For all that, the first person to speak of music in numbers, that is, in alphabetic figures, was a pupil who is said to have betrayed Pythagoras through writing during a civil war. Hypassos of Metapontum. By the whole is like beta to 1, by 5 like gamma to beta, by 4 like delta to gamma. These theorems, though obscure, remain entirely true and can be shown to any child. Hypassos, on his lyre, commanded the play of strings, which unified numbers to music. To its eternal glory, 1, as the origin or foundation of all that exists, was written out. 2, 3, and 4, on the other hand, were represented by figures. With that, harmony emerged at what articulates the whole. Melea, in Homer, the plural form of limbs, gathered into singular melos a song that played through all the strings in 2 tetrachords, a 5th above and a 4th below. The dimension of the octave, philelios, added to Hypassos' observation equals the 4th times the 5th. Syllable kai, pardon my Greek here, kai diaxion. 3 in ratio to 2 times 4 in ratio to 3 equals 12 in ratio to 6 equals 2 in ratio to 1. In other words, Hypassos read the master's tetrachites as an operator that made not just addition but also music available to reflection. Everyone's ears hear octaves as identities, and the 5th and 4th, especially after Euler and Fourier, have constituted European high culture. That is why Pythagoreans, who did not just hearken to the master's words in an acoustic capacity, but also learned the reasons underlying them from Hypassos, are called mathematicians. They lend intervals, which are numbers, names that can be spoken and recorded. The arithmetic mean of the whole that is called an octave is the 5th, and the harmonic mean is the 4th. A geometric mean, in contrast, should entertain the same logos to the tonic note as the octave. In modern terms, 1 to x would equal x to 2. All this can be done with lengths of string. It cannot be recorded numerically. The square root of 2 remains areton and allogon, unspeakable, like shameful protrusions. It is a wordless or irrational. Under conditions where an alphabet limits operations to natural numbers, real numbers do not unconceal themselves into being. They found, as their name indicates, a geometry that is strictly separate from arithmetic. Hippocrates of Chios and Archaeus, a general and lord of Tarentum, founded geometry by replacing the tetrachites with lines and endpoints. Pythagoras' counting stone turned into a duality which was almost inaudible in the Dorian dialect. In each case, the first point was called alpha, the second beta, and so on. And so, almost a century after Hippasos, the Greek alphabet brought geometry into being and discourse. After all, joined together to gamma and hegram made lengths, even if they were alogical, ready to hand for a science of diagrams. This is a detail that shows the marks have been added to the book, to the Dictionary of Weaving. And this is from Kulturgeschichte. The marks are all over it. I'm not sure if these were added by Darboven or if they were existing in the process of using it for weaving or in a pedagogical context. The implicit argument here is that Darboven's counting flow of line is also the thread going through the counting process of weaving up and down as it becomes systematized by the binary zeros and ones of the jacquard loom, as an image of working just before the computer was invented. On the other hand, in fast-forwarding thousands of years in pages in Kittler's version of the history of the relationship between music and math, and writing and media, Kittler sees the recourse to whole natural numbers in the Turing machine, so in the invention of the computational machine that is frequently seen as the origin of our computers, in order to make machines do human calculations in Turing's 1936 thesis as read by Kittler, an entire development within technological and culture and math and music and math and science comes up against the needed reduction to computable real numbers, a reduction which Turing proves to be as powerful as the set of natural numbers. And now again, I'm plagiarizing at length from Kittler. We might also say, much more simply, computable real numbers can be described with the finite signs of an alphabet. This and this alone made it possible in 1943 for the calculations performed by human beings to become calculations performed by machines. As Lacan would have put it, the real, because its body exceeds counting operations, persists as the impossible beyond all computability. And with that, every digital computer today has fallen thousands of years behind modern analysis and implements, once again, strictly Pythagorean mathematics. Therefore, although it is not necessary, it follows that circuit technology should also reach back to Pythagorean division of all numbers into even and odd. All states into a digital machine can be implemented either as open or closed switches, that is, with the binary number 1 and 0, as Leibniz introduced them. Otherwise, one would inscribe no logos into physis, such as occurs millions of times a day by means of electron beam lithography. When digital wafers are manufactured in dust-free, ultra-clean labs, it costs of billions of dollars or euros just to build. Otherwise, computer technology would not be this alliance of hard and software, of physics and logic, which has taken the place of the gods who have fled far away. Zeus, as you know, was at once the mighty brightness of the Greek sky and the lightning that guides everything. Only gods and computers are in the position of predicting to today whether blue skies or rainstorms will be the weather tomorrow.
Sorry. Things are only positions of time. To get back to Darboven's employment of specific things as catalysts or irritants within her installations, you will recognize many of these things from the excerpt of the film we just saw, 4 Jahreszeiten, der Mond ist aufgegangen, 4 seasons, the moon has risen, 1983. What is remarkable about Darboven's use of found objects is that nothing is done to them. Nothing is added or taken away to make them appear more strange than they already are. Well, almost nothing. The inset clock in the statuette has been rotated slightly within its housing. And the robot, with a light bulb shining from the top of its head, wears a folkloric clock as if it were a pocket watch. 2 anachronisms colliding in the mind of a person who loved to think about Kronos. Ich denke über Kronos nach. Darboven's things are not presented as art, but as withering specimens, a commentary. In their matter-of-factness, it becomes difficult to locate the provocation, though the effect of the objects is extremely provocative. It is strange to realize that the selection of objects is never motivated by taste or style. Darboven is completely dislocated from considerations of this sort. Her objects have no aura. The same could be said for Darboven's choice of subjects in her writing, subjects including Bismarck, Rilke, the Enlightenment, Picasso, East-West democracy, Rainer Werner Fassbinder, and inventions that have changed our world. They are never nominated by fashionable politics, but by complexity, curiosity, contradiction, and enormity. Darboven is not, for example, framing and fetishizing objects according to some post-68 Marxist consensual taste terror. It is with the addition of objects that Darboven's work becomes fully four-dimensional. But they are strange to encounter, full of repressed violence and sadness. The doll-sized mannequins in Baker's sample uniforms have the modeling, hairstyling, and pointed faces I know from fascist paintings, blurring together with glamour shots from the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Positioned as they are across from the gray-haired mannequin joggers, they establish a tension, as if the two pairs are looking at one another across an abyss, but also a typology of form, as often seen in the works of other conceptualists of Darboven's generation. The Bakers stand on one plinth, next to a lonely Africanesque carved tourist tchotchke, representing the long afterlife of colonialism as it meshes with the German fantasy of escape through Urlaub, which means exotic vacation. In Kulturgeschichte, but especially in the magisterially creepy Kinder dieser Welt, Children of This World from 1990 to 1996, Darboven manages to turn every viewer into a pervert, perpetrator, and victim. The most ideologically fraught object symbol in Kulturgeschichte is the life-size cross that has been decorated like a Christmas tree, with a portrait of Christ, a portrait of a Nazi officer over a redundant picture of Christ on the crucifix, and on the right arm of the cross, a framed sheet of uncut chromolithographs. The inclusion of this remnant of turn-of-the-century childhood is crucial. For those who don't know, these sheets of die-cut, webbed chromolithographs were a highly collectible and tradable commodity, their production reaching its peak at the turn of the 19th and 20th century, in tandem with the popularization of albums in which these brightly colored prints were pasted in various constellations, and sometimes even accompanied by invented or copied poetry or sentiments commemorating specific dates. I believe that Darboven included this item on her repurposing of the crucifix as part of a complicated, rebus-like critique that I can't here fully unpack, but I can tell you that this particular piece is the punchline. The German word for these prints is Glanzbilder, shiny pictures. But they are also known as oblaten, and oblate is the wafer used in the Eucharist. The more interesting aspect of this object's appearance on the scaffolding of the cross, however, is its relationship to childhood economies of exchange, desire, and acquisition. These sheets of bonded but separable and reconfigurable image objects left an indelible impression on Darboven, as did their invitation to compulsive behavior, to order, compose, arrange, and repeat. A child of capitalism is taught to order its impulses. What I've tried to suggest visually is that Kulturgeschichte is an album made by somebody who felt tasked with a lifetime duty to account for not only the history of her family, but the history of her culture. Of course, albums are totally inflected by the person who made them, from their layout to their captions, and the choices of images that appear, as well as those that don't. Consider how much bandwidth Darboven's own self and her reinserted work takes up in her representation of the cultural history she assembled from 1980 to 1983, spanning the period 1880 to 1983. Does culture produce a self, or is the self preceded by social forces? A quote I plucked from one of the panels in Kulturgeschichte reads, "Not every work is art, yet art is work. Was, is, and when further, will be existence." But there is a feeling that even though Darboven understood her lifetime duty, she also knew she was too late. She knew this when she wrote over and over again the words, heute/today.
Thank you.
Thank you.